Welcome to the GlobalAutoIndustry.com audio interview series. I'm Ron Hesse, and today I'm interviewing Daron Gifford. Daron is partner, strategy consulting services leader, automotive industry leader, and commercial due diligence services leader for Plante Moran. Daron is also one of the automotive industry's leading experts. Today we will discuss the U.S. automotive industry, what you need to know. How you doing, Daron?
Great, Ron. How are you today?
It's a lovely day, and thanks for joining us. And let me start off with the first question. Could you please give us a short overview of the automotive industry in the U.S.?
Sure, Ron. In short, it's going to be a bit relative. The auto industry in the U.S. is pretty complicated, so we'll talk about that, I'm sure, a little bit more. If you go back historically in the auto industry in the U.S., and I'm primarily focusing on passenger vehicles because there's also an aspect of transportation in the auto industry, which also includes the larger trucks for commercial hauling and those kinds of things. And those are two very different markets around the world, but also in the U.S. as well. So most of our discussion today, I think, will be about passenger vehicles because that's really where a lot more of the volume is. But the other vehicle segments are also worthwhile to consider in the future. From a passenger vehicle standpoint, the auto industry in the U.S., it's over 100 years old. For many years and decades, it was the leader in getting started with automobiles, and really, I think because of some of the demographics in the U.S. As far as disposable income, was also one of the leaders as far as volume of production in the U.S. Now that began to, if I go back historically, it began to decline really in the 70s and 80s, and a lot of that was because of the fuel crisis and frankly, a Japanese manufacturer called Toyota was very aggressive at moving into the U.S. market with very high quality vehicles at a lower cost with much higher fuel economy than the U.S. vehicles. So you saw some decline happening back in those days, and then that allowed, frankly, the introduction of many what the U.S. would call foreign makers, but automakers from around the world to come in. So you saw Toyota, Nissan, Honda, Mitsubishi, Mazda come into the U.S. You also saw the European makers starting to move into the U.S. in greater force, and they all set up production plants here in the United States. And so now in the U.S., it's not just a U.S.-based automotive economy from the OEM standpoint with General Motors, Ford, and what used to be known as Chrysler, but now you have quite a mixture of global manufacturers and global capabilities on the OEM side as well as supplier side. So in the U.S., you still have the market leaders in General Motors and Ford that are based here, but now you have Stellantis, which is a combination of PSA, Fiat, and Chrysler in the U.S. Then you also still have Toyota and Honda and Nissan, but now you also have BMW, Volkswagen, Mercedes, all have production plants here. Subaru also has a production plant in the U.S., and now there's a new production plant going up in the southern part of the U.S. It's a joint venture with Toyota and Mazda. So it's become a bit of a melting pot from the standpoint of potential customers for manufacturers, supplier manufacturers coming into the U.S. The volumes here have been relatively stable, and from a sales standpoint, say in the 16 to 17 million vehicles per year range. And generally, the pricing in the U.S. has also been very attractive as well. So this is part of why it's still an attractive market for many other automotive OEMs, but as well as suppliers to try and move into the U.S. and to gain some market share in the United States as far as the vehicles that are being produced and sold here in the United States. So hopefully that's not too much detail, but that's a broad overview of at least some of the auto industry here, Ron.
Daron, what is the outlook for the automotive industry in the U.S.?
Well, you'll get some varying opinions. In my opinion, actually, is pretty positive. I'm relatively optimistic from the United States standpoint. One of the challenges globally for everyone this past year has been COVID-19, and so the pandemic in the United States basically closed an auto industry here for about 3 months, almost an entire quarter. Coming out of that, we've seen very robust demand for automobiles. Consumers still need to transport themselves, and as we start to open up the economy, consumers are wanting to buy new vehicles, or they have vehicles that are coming off lease And leasing in the United States is a very big part of our financial equation as far as buying vehicles here. And right now you see a shortage of supply of automobiles. So we have a supply problem in the U.S., which is our supply base. The suppliers can't get their appropriate materials or can't make enough parts or components to feed the auto industry. And so on the sales side, in the U.S., we have the dealer environment, which we have dealers as our sales and distribution channels here, are having shortages of inventory, especially of popular vehicles. So you see a really an interesting dilemma right now, which is demand is exceeding supply in this market. Now, on top of COVID-19 and the resurgence from that, we also have some shortages in specific components here, like semiconductors, and that is turning into a global shortage as the consumer goods industry is taking on and absorbing more of the volume for semiconductors than the auto industry has historically. It's creating some issues as automobiles, frankly, become more technologically sophisticated. And we have many more semiconductors and microprocessors in a vehicle to run it today, to operate it, than we had just even a few years ago. And so that's another compounding factor in the industry. Now, a third compounding factor from the outlook, and these are all frankly still positive, even if it sounds a little negative, is the new administration. So President Biden has indicated very strongly that he wants to be known as the climate president, maybe put it that way, and really trying to push back and reverse some of the negative effects of climate change over the past few years. And so, even as recently as yesterday and the day before, he's made some significant pronouncements about reducing the greenhouse gas emissions in the United States by half by 2030. In order to do that, it will require a significant change in the automotive industry and the automotive fleet that's operating in the U.S. And almost everyone also believes that this is going to require a dramatic shift away from the internal combustion engine into electrification technology and specific battery electric vehicles, especially over this time frame. That will that's a very positive impact from a climate standpoint. It's a very I'll call it a serious concern for many in the auto industry, as those who work in the industry in the U.S. try to figure out so what componentries need to change, how will the vehicles change, how do their businesses change in the future with all this new electric technology coming on board. So with that all said and done, I still think the auto industry is a great industry, especially in the next, I'll say, 5 to 20 years in the U.S.
Daron, what are the main advantages of doing business in the U.S.?
Well, I guess the first one relates back to my prior point. I think the technology here is pretty advanced. Now, in Western Europe, in China, Japan, Korea, other places, it's a global industry, and so a lot of that technologies transfer around the globe. But in the United States, we have a mix here of larger vehicles, the largest in the world from a passenger vehicle standpoint. We have a lot of trucks, a lot of sport utilities. It tends to be larger. I'll call it top hats, if is the term used, but larger vehicles from a capacity standpoint. As we adopt some of these new electric technologies into those types of vehicles, there are some great advantages for suppliers and manufacturers that are ready to jump in and produce parts and technologies to support some of that electrification, those electric vehicles. I think the other part that's great in the U.S. is we have relative stability compared to many parts of the world. The currency here is still pretty stable. Says the economic demands have been growing and not declining. And so even though we've had significant recession last year, that was primarily driven by the virus, but we've come back. So it's been a very resilient economy as well. And in the U.S., frankly, the auto industry, the way it's structured is whether it's good or not, there's much less reliance on, I'll call it, very traditional relationships in the U.S. And so, and English being the language here, and that's tended to be a language around the world, it's easier for manufacturers from outside the U.S., frankly, to come in if they have the right kind of intellectual property, knowledge, capabilities for production. Quality is going to be important, but that bringing that kind of capability in as a manufacturer into the U.S. Can be a great market environment for you to come in and establish an operation and to really engage and grow your business in the U.S.
What is the best way to find the right partner to do business with in the U.S. automotive industry?
Well, you need to have some local help. And I think, as anyone would say, when you're growing globally, you can't do it from afar. And so, one, getting the right kind of expertise to support you would be important. And that could be by hiring executives to help you. Frankly, what we've found in the Plant Moran practice is that we do a lot of work with suppliers from outside the U.S. Wanting to come into the U.S. and sell either products or, frankly, to set up production, which is going to be something in the U.S. I think will be of prime importance in the future. And so we have within Plant Moran, our services group, we provide accounting support, tax support, um, the consulting capabilities for site selection, for production operations, for advising you on your business. This is one of the practice areas that we like to work with our clients in trying to establish that kind of production here. And so we have a lot of expertise, frankly, in the U.S. That being said, there's other companies as well that can provide some of that. But I think that we have a very satisfied group of our clients and very successful as well as far as getting operations established here. I think and part of that is really understanding the customer base and what the customers are looking for. Now, back to a little bit of the outlook as well, is that I think, especially given the supply chain disruptions I talked about earlier, there is an increasing focus in the U.S. from the automakers' perspective and the suppliers here of also looking to shorten the supply chain. So it's not as the supply chain is not as global as far as reaching around the world on making it and exporting and shipping and distribution. But then what's going to be more locally located, closer to where the end customer is. And the more you can shorten that and provide stability and service and confidence in your customer, then that'll be another critical part of really coming here and then helping to relate and identify with kind of the right partners in the U.S.
Daron, do you have any final thoughts?
Well, of course I do, Ron. So, but the final thoughts, this because I think is I think the U.S. is a great market. It's a potentially a growing market for manufacturers who are looking to really expand into this marketplace, but it's not going to be an overnight endeavor. So I would say that one thought as I talk through all this is patience will be required. It's unlikely you'll be able to walk in and get a contract tomorrow. It's going to take a significant amount of time and some investment from your side to get those relationships established, the new relationships, to also bring over and protect yourself as well on technology and capabilities that you have. And so you need to allow some of that time. And then the way the industry is structured from an original equipment manufacturer standpoint, the programs in the auto industry are at least 2 to 3 years long in development. So even if you are sourced for componentry for a new vehicle, that new vehicle probably is not going to launch. This is 2021 until at least 2023, 24 timeframe. So it's 2 to 3 years out. And so even if you win the awards, there'll be some investment required to set up production or to get things established before any revenue can really be seen when that vehicle goes up for sale in 2 or 3 years. So I think patience will be rewarded. It's a high volume industry with high rewards in it, but also risk around it as well. So those are the kind of things I think it still need to be considered, but still make this a potentially a really, really strong return on investment for manufacturers wanting to build out in the U.S.
Daron, thanks for your great insights. And that concludes today's interview. Everyone, have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Ron. Take care.